Good afternoon, everyone. This is Tim Gleisner from the Library of Michigan, coming to you today with this installment of the Michigan Notable Books 2020 virtual tour, this time with Abra Berens, author of the cookbook Roughage. And as always, just remember that if you want to support the Library of Michigan or the Michigan Notable Books program, you can find contact information at the beginning and ending of this segment for the Library of Michigan Foundation, and they'd be more than happy to help us with Michigan Notable Books. And one word, this book, Roughage, beautiful book. It was a book that as soon as it came out, many of us on the committee knew that we definitely wanted. It was just a beautiful book in illustrations, in photos, in recipes, and stories. And with that, let me introduce Abra Berens. Abra, how are you?
I'm good, Tim. How are you doing?
I'm good. So Abra, give us some background on yourself. How did you become a cook and how did you become a writer?
Well, where should we start? I guess, so I grew up on the western side of Michigan, about 20 miles south of Holland, to parents who were both in a farming family, but also were both anesthesiologists. So our whole childhood, we kind of went between the farming side, which was my dad's family, and then also their work with that. So as early as I can remember, we had summer jobs of hoeing pickles, or, after the pickles are combined, picking up the ones that got missed into a 5-gallon bucket, kind of thing. And from there, I always worked in restaurants. So I never was a cook, but I spent a lot of time at places in Holland like Paretti's until midnight, getting kind of learning the ropes there. And then I went to the University of Michigan for my undergraduate. And the summer between my sophomore and junior year, I wanted to stay in Ann Arbor, and so I needed to get a job. So I had a family friend who had worked at Zingerman's before, and place seems cool, maybe I'll apply here. I know I like restaurant work. And it was, maybe one of the single best happenstance decisions I've ever made, because it was there that I really fell in love with food, and I started cooking there. So I worked all through college, and then after college stayed on for another year and a half. And it was in that year and a half that I started going from the front of the house to the back of the house and doing more cooking. And also just got to be a part of that business that is so influential, both in terms of the food that they're bringing in, but also the ethos of the business. And I got really steeped in that. And Roger Bowser, who is the managing partner and chef at the deli, Zingerman's Deli, started bringing in local produce. And so that was the first time I had really understood the local food movement kind of through the lens of what it meant for a restaurant, and how different this beautiful speckled romaine lettuce was to the normal greens that we would get in, which were great, but just didn't have sort of that certain, thing that these did, coming from Richard at Tantre Farm at the time. And then, as luck would have it, one relationship begets another. And Roger had done his externship at Ballymaloe House in the south of Ireland. So at the end of my time at Zingerman's, I was really trying to decide what I wanted to do. And I had thought about going into the Peace Corps, and I had gotten in, and I just wasn't sure if I wanted to do that or if I wanted to really pursue food. And he said, well, you need some foundational work that we can't provide you, but you don't really need 2.5 years of cooking school. So maybe check out Ballymaloe, which is on a 100-acre working organic farm. And he knew I was interested in agriculture and all those things. So he encouraged me to apply there, and I went and had 12 weeks of cooking school under Dorina Allen and her tutelage. And then I spent another 3 months in the UK working, and then moved back to Chicago. And that's where I was cooking full time, was in Chicago. My now husband is from Chicago. So we met in Ann Arbor. I went to cooking school, and then he moved back to Chicago, and then we met back up there. And so I cooked through restaurants in Chicago for a few years, and always knew, I think it was at cooking school that I kind of realized I really love food, but I really love restaurants and sort of the hubbub of them, and thinking about, could I make a place that is of a place, and use a dinner to really tell the story of a farm or of that region or what people are growing there, things like that. So that's where the idea kind of started. And then I had a friend who wanted to start a vegetable farm, and we just thought, let's give it a try. So we started farming in 2009. And I farmed full time for 3 years, going back to Chicago in the winters and cooking through the winter and then farming all summer. And then had a couple of years where we did dinners on our farm. So they were, 5-course tasting menus based exclusively on what we grow. And it was while I was up there, which is in Northport, Michigan, up near Traverse City area.
Mhm.
While I was up there in putting on those dinners, I pitched a column to the Record Eagle, which is the paper up there. It's a really wonderful small town paper. And they said, yeah, sure, we'd love to have more content. And so I was writing at first it was every other week column about what we were growing and how to cook with it. And that was the foundation of the book. So I kind of thought that writing a cookbook from this column would be, they're all written and we just zip it up between a couple of covers and bing, bang, boom, and we're done. And it was not that. But that was the starting point for the book. So the way the book is organized is alphabetically by vegetable. So each vegetable is a chapter. And it opens with an introductory essay, which is anything from a story about how we grow it, a story from my life, a story, a silly little bit of fiction comparing celery to Julia Child. It's all over the place, really. And then a little section of notes, which was really the information we were giving people at our farmers market stalls. So how to select a beet, what to do with kohlrabi, how do you know how to store kale or greens or herbs in general, things like that. And really putting all of that into one quick cheat sheet sort of spot. And then the recipes came after that. And so it was, the same vegetable prepared different ways with lots of different flavor variations to show people kind of how I was thinking about vegetables when we were making these dinners. Yeah, so that's the whole story. That's me in a nutshell, I guess.
No, that's awesome. So let me ask you a question. So this is a cookbook of vegetables, right? I mean, this is, so was your column in Traverse City just all vegetables? I mean, was that what it was all about? And why?
It was, yeah, it wasn't, I guess sometimes we did other ingredients. Like I certainly did a piece on honey and on butter and smoked fish and lake trout and things like that. So it was always about one particular ingredient. And but it was primarily vegetables because that's what we were sort of focused on with our farm. And then also, I mean, truth be told, it was an attempt to try to sell more vegetables too, because when I first started the column, it came out on Wednesday morning, and we went to the Wednesday Sarah Hardy Farmers Market, and it was like the market that we earned the least at. And so I was like, well, maybe I can write a column, and then people will like read it and come to the market. That never like successfully happened, where somebody was like, I read about this in the paper, and now here I am buying it. But it was a good idea, I guess. But yeah, so primarily vegetables. And I think for me, what I realized farming really, it changed the way that I cook pretty significantly. I came up in restaurants that were really focused on nose to tail eating and a lot of organ meat and offal and not wasting anything, but vegetables weren't as much the star. And when I started farming, we were just surrounded by this amazing produce, and it was so exciting and really was really enthralling. But also, I mean, we were broke. We put all of our like savings into starting this farm, and vegetable farms are not super high margin businesses, and so we were eating. It was this like funny disjunct between being really really poor and also eating some of the best meals of my life. And the very first year that I was up in Northport, I took a job at Black Star Farms pouring in their tasting room. And I was planning on going back to Chicago, but they asked me to stay a couple weeks later than I probably would have. So the farm was all shut down. And I was just kind of hanging out doing that work for them. And I didn't want to have to go to the store. And so I had a bunch of carrots that were left from the season. We had some baby kale because we had these great big kale plants from the whole season, but they got really aphidy, and so we cut them back. And then all of the energy that was in those roots put up these little tiny baby kale leaves that were so good. And then we also used to have chickens, and so the chickens had moved to another farm for the winter, but I still had like 24 eggs or something. And so there was probably a week or two where I was really eating eggs, carrots, and baby kale every single night for dinner. And I just kept making different meals with those same three ingredients, so they were always different. And that sort of was one of the impetus for the column too, is like, we only grow a certain number of things in the northern Midwest. And so how do you embrace that repetition and try to celebrate it and make, new things, so it doesn't feel like we're always eating the same, like, carrot dish or whatever. But
I mean, like you have such a variety of recipes, and folks, just to show you, this is, how many pages is this, Abra?
it's 465.
460. So, I mean, there's such a great variety of recipes in this book. So let me ask, if I remember correctly, you have one that's like a cooked recipe, another one that's a raw for each of the vegetables. Am I correct in that organization?
Yeah, so there's each vegetable has at least two different preparation techniques. And the way that I kind of generally describe it to people, I have a very linear brain. Some people, think sort of circuitously. I am not one of those people. And so for me, each chapter is a little bit like an NCAA bracket in reverse. So you start with the winner, which is the vegetable. So you went to the market, you got a CSA, whatever you have that you're excited about cooking. And so you got that to start with. And then you can look at the preparation techniques. So that could be raw or roasted or pureed or confit or saute, like any number of different things. And then for each preparation technique, there's a single recipe that's a proper cookbook recipe with all of the instruction detailed out and the amounts and everything. But then there's also 3 variations of that. So that shows how the same ingredient prepared the same way could look very different. And I think the beet chapter is the best example of that, in that the first preparation technique is steam roasted beets, where you wash them, let the water cling to the roots, put them into a roasting pan, a little bit of water and olive oil and salt, and then cover it and bake them so they're getting steamy roasted. And then when they're done, you peel them, and then the recipe is for a salad with it's smoked whitefish, sour cream, dill, and sunflower seeds. So it's very like Eastern European kind of nod, and what those flavors would be. But then the variations are 3 different ones, one with beets and citrus and feta and mint and pecans. So for me, I love beets in the winter, and I love it with citrus like orange or Meyer lemon, things like that. But then there's also a salad that is more for Midwestern fall, with apples and cheddar and walnuts and parsley. And then there's a salad with wheat berries and dried cherries, Northern Michigan, a lot of dried cherries, and things like that. So it makes kind of a more grain-based salad. So that's how you can take beets, prepare them the same way, and then it's like a flutter of different ways to actually serve them. And then the second preparation technique is pureed. So you take those steam roasted beets, puree them in a food processor with just a little bit of olive oil and salt, and then you can use that puree. The recipe is to dress pasta, so it makes like this magenta hot pink pasta with pickled golden raisins and poppy seeds. So again, that sort of Polish Eastern European combination of beets and poppy seeds and raisin. And then the variations are things that don't look anything like that. So you can thin that puree down to make a soup, sort of like a borscht. You can blend it into white beans or chickpeas to make a pink hummus. Or you could use it, I think the other variation is to dress risotto, which is a bit more similar to the pasta, where you just make a standard risotto, plop a little bit of the beet puree in, and then it makes it nice and hot pink.
So you put out all these recipes just now. So I have to ask, how long have you been compiling these recipes? And are all the recipes in this book from experimentation, or did you inherit some? Did you learn them from other places like Zingerman's? Or
There is at least one Zingerman's recipe in there in the garlic confit section. There's a tomato soup, which is, I feel like my version of tomato soup is directly influenced by Zingerman's spicy garlicky tomato soup. So that was certainly one.
Okay.
I think I feel like it would be a very arrogant food writer to claim that any recipe is their own originally. And so I'm sure that they all come from different influences of things I had seen before. I've been super inspired and informed by a book called The Flavor Bible by Karen Page and Andrew Dorenberg,
Mhm.
which is not a cookbook. It's just a list of flavor combinations. So it's structurally sort of similar to roughage in that you would have a bunch of carrots, look up carrot, and then it would have all of these different flavors that go with carrot. And some of the classic ones, would be bolded so that you know what the like traditional French repertoire would be. And so I used that a ton when I was first starting out as a young cook. And I think that's where a lot of the ideas of swapping flavors in and out really came from. And as far as the specific recipes that are in there, yeah, I think the best advice for anybody who's watching this who's interested in writing a book, let alone a cookbook, the best advice I was given was at the outset of writing, because it's a really daunting task to sit down with like a blank Word document and be like, I'm going to write my cookbook now. But it was to start with a really detailed table of contents.
Mhm.
And so I just laid out all of the vegetables and all the preparation techniques. How would I, if I were, presented with them, how would I want to prepare them? And then put together the flavor combinations and then just started chipping away at it.
So I have to ask, because it's not just recipes in this book. Again, it's illustrations, it's photographs, and it's stories. I mean, you've interspersed so much into this book. Were you intending on putting all that into roughage?
Uh, I don't know for sure. The book, when it was contracted with Chronicle, was supposed to be like a little pocket guide to the market. So like something you could like put in your bag and take to a farmer's market. And then it's like, oh, I've never seen kohlrabi before. I'm going to look it up real quick and take a glance. And it ended up not being that. Like you said, it's 465 pages. So Chronicle, thankfully, the publisher, uh, saw what the book was becoming and embraced it and gave me the page length and the page size. It was supposed to be a much smaller book. And so they expanded the page format to include more in it. Um, I think that I wanted it to be a book that would meet people wherever they were. So I was mentioning the Flavor Bible. I got really into that book and I gave it to a lot of people for holiday presents. And if somebody was already a confident cook, they loved it. And it was like, unlocking this treasure trove for them. But if they weren't a confident cook or if they were really recipe focused, it was like useless for them. And so I wanted it to be something that would help people in either way, that there's a recipe for guidance if you need it, but then there's all of these other just suggestions if you didn't need the specific recipes. And then I've always been really inspired by Nigel Slater, who's an English cookery writer, and just his ability to paint a scene. And I realized that I'm not a celebrity chef. Nobody knows me from the next Abra on the street. And so how would I kind of convey what food means to me, and that I think I personally believe that food is one of the most important things we can focus on because it touches every single element of our lives. And so everything from food insecurity to equity across racial and class lines, regional access, all sorts of things, labor forces, immigration, everything food touches. And so I wanted to provide space to kind of give people a sense of me and some of the things that I find important, like in the potato chapter. I remember the first time I dug potatoes, and it's still, every time I dig potatoes, it's this thing where it's like there's a mound of dirt and there's a plant that has died back, and you just plunge your hands into the soil, and then out comes all of these like shining new potatoes, and their skin is thin because they're just pulled from the ground, and they're like electric color compared to the soil. And I just remember that first time having so much fun doing it, and then suddenly just thinking about the potato famine in Ireland and how, um, you know, imagine what that would be like if you were expecting this crop to feed your country and it didn't, and it failed, and that
Yeah.
then the imperialist system with the UK wasn't there to save them, and what that would mean, and just becoming so overcome with emotion of like food is so tied to everything. So I don't know, I wanted to convey that, and hopefully in a lighthearted enough way that people weren't just like crying into their dinner the whole time. But yeah.
So let me ask, I mean, you've mentioned all the places you've been in Michigan, Holland, Ann Arbor, Northport. You're down in Three Oaks, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So this cookbook, could it be done other places? Could it be written other places? Would it have to be different? Because I mean, this is all local produce, am I correct?
Yeah. I mean, I guess, well, it makes me, that question reminds me of someone told me one time that news anchors for national news programs are trained in a Northern Midwestern accent
Mhm.
because it sounds of everywhere. So it's sort of, it just blends in. Um, and that kind of irritated me at first when I heard that, in sort of the general misconceptions of the Midwest. But now I also sort of like it. And I think I was thinking about that with roughage, in that I care a lot about local produce, and there's intentionally no seasonality associated with the book outside of the particular chapter, and that is because I wanted it to be something that someone in California or in Brazil or in New Zealand or in the UK could use just as easily as someone from Michigan. And we talk a lot about seasonality with food, but I don't think we have enough conversations about how the seasonality is so different across even our own country. Like people talk about like don't buy strawberries in wintertime. Well, strawberry season in Florida is in February. And by the time that the glossy food magazines have their tomato issue, tomatoes are done in Arizona, and they haven't even started in Washington state. So I think that there's space to have more conversations about what these different regions mean. And so by organizing it alphabetically, it meant that people could dip in and dip out whenever. So in some ways, I think no, roughage it's so Michigan based and it's so focused on the Midwest. But also that it could fit into other places. And maybe it's like the reverse. I was so touched on book tour last spring. I would go, I was able to go all over the country, which was such a privilege, especially now considering how locked down we are. But and people, every event would say, "Oh yeah, I'm born and raised in New York City, but I went to college in the Midwest, or I have family in the Midwest, or I'm from Iowa, and this resonated with me for this." And I feel like Midwesterners are really, we're very prevalent around the country. And so we sort of fit in wherever we go, I guess.
Okay, so let me ask you, what was the hardest part of writing this book?
Uh, I think it was probably the time between when everything was submitted and when it was going to come out.
Yeah.
The writing of it, I was able to write mostly in the winter of 2017 into 2018. And so I was really just kind of holed up at home. We had a ton of snow that year, and so we weren't really going very many places. And I was just writing for 10 hours a day every day. And it kind of felt like this thing that was just mine. And then more people started seeing it, and it expanded out, and all those things. And then we started realizing that it was going to be launched nationally, and I just suddenly was like, is it even good? Like, I can't tell if this is going to work for anybody, if anyone's going to like benefit from reading it. And there's so much noise in the food world. Just you know, there's a million recipes for everything. There's a million people who are on YouTube doing these like really wonderful explanation videos of things. I was just like, is this even worth anything? And so I think it was that, and I couldn't do anything about it because I was just, you know, we still had like 3, or I guess it was like 5 months before it was going to come out. And so it was kind of like, I guess I'm just going to sit here and think about it, which is not generally a great thing for me.
But I mean, like, this is a beautiful book, and I don't know if everybody would know, but tell us, like, where it's been recognized. I mean, we can talk about the New York Times, Los Angeles Times. There have been quite a few, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the nicest thing. Like I said, I didn't know if anybody would read it or if it would resonate with anybody. And so to have, you know, some of the voices in the food world that I really look up to, people like Kim Severson from the New York Times, who does such amazing food writing and also just regular writing, you know, through a food angle. People like Helen Rosner from the New Yorker, Ben Bemis from the LA Times, Joe Yonan from the Washington Post, you know, all those people who are just much more steeped in that world than I am, say that it was meaningful to them was better than I ever could have imagined. Yeah.
That's
So,
fantastic. So, what did you learn from writing this book?
what did I learn? I mean, it's really fun. It's really fun to write a cookbook. I think anyway. I mean, I think what I learned, I have a new appreciation for the team that created it. You know, you were saying it's such a beautiful book that has almost nothing to do with me. I am not a like visually minded person by any means. And so the photographers from Detroit, Emily Berger, the food stylist is a friend of mine from Chicago who also has a, you know, a lot of ties to New Buffalo area. Lucy Engelman is the illustrator, and she spent a lot of time growing up in Michigan. She's from Pittsburgh, or she lives in Pittsburgh now. You know, both of the editors on the book have Midwestern roots, and so does Kari, my agent, who oversaw a lot of it too. And you know, everyone just put so much work into it. That it's just such a like gift to be able to have that all come together in this project that we're all like psyched about, and also that everyone feels like is theirs. You know, I think the nicest note that I got was Roughage it was featured in something, and I guess the copy editor got in touch with the editor at large at the publisher and was like, did you see my book was on this thing? And I was like, yes, it is your book. Like, it is all of our books. And it is, you know, so many people who contributed to it and just lent their time and their talent to it is, you know, it makes me always want to collaborate because it can be really great.
Fantastic. So, in a previous conversation, you and I talked about, though, I mean, there was the length of the book. They did eventually have to say, okay, something's got to give, right? So
Yeah.
what happened there?
Well, so I'm the way that my brain works is I tried to give them as much material as possible. So
Sure.
I wrote, you know, long essays, you know, give as much as we can. We photographed every dish in the book because I just wanted them to have options. And so, you know, I did not expect it to be as long as it is. And I was like, well, I thought you guys would cut all this stuff. And they're like, no, we want to keep all of it. We want to use all these photography, like all these photos. But then I forgot to include a chapter for Brussels sprouts. I had writing for it. And, you know, I wrote each chapter as an individual Word document and then put them all together for the big manuscript. And it just like, I just forgot to copy paste that one. And so it got left out, and I got the edit back and I was like, I forgot that I have this thing. Should I just like tuck it into the book or like, you know, see if they'll add it later? And it became this whole thing. And I kept trying to like sneak it in. And finally my editor was like, Abra, the book is 465 pages. Like, you can't add another word. You can only take words out. And I was like, oh, okay. I had no idea. So I was like, can we just make the print smaller? And she was like, no, we can't. That's not how it works. I was like, what about the margins? Can you make the margins really narrow? And she was just like, no, what are you in like college trying to lengthen out your thing?
Right.
So
I love
yeah.
that story. I'll be honest with you. I look for Brussels sprouts. Broccoli is definitely covered in here, but the Brussels sprouts, you're
I
going to come out
know.
with it soon, right?
I hope so. Yeah, I was saying to I do actually I have I'm contracted to do two more books of the Chronicle. The next one is coming out in the fall of 2021 right now. That'll be a grains and legumes book, and then there'll be a book on fruit. And we kept talking about Brussels sprouts. How are we going to work those Brussels sprouts in? So there's definitely a Brussels sprouts recipe in the grains and legumes book for you. But yeah, someday we'll get around to roughage too, but not quite there
Yeah,
yet.
that makes sense. I understand. So let me ask you, what are some of your favorite recipes? Which ones would you like tell anybody that they should just go cook right
Mm. Um, I mean, I guess when people say which one's your favorite, I think which ones are the ones I use the most. I make the cabbage salad with the seared melon a fair
now?
amount because I really love the like sweetness of the melon with the spice of the chili oil. I also I make the broccoli recipe with the melted cheese and chili oil.
That's
And
good.
those are both pretty simple recipes. I almost didn't include that one for the broccoli because I was like, it really feels like so simple, but it's so tasty, and it is true to how we eat at home. But then the ones that I really love too are some of the pureed recipes. Several of the recipe testers were like, I didn't expect. I read the recipes I was supposed to test and was like, oh, I have to get my food processor out, and like I don't have time for this. And then they really loved it, and they found that they were making it in large batches and then freezing them so they could use the purees later on. And it's sort of that weird overlap of restaurant work and home cooking.
Hmm.
I think a lot of times cookbooks that are written by restaurant chefs, they tend to not be that practical for a home kitchen. It's like, a 20-page recipe on how to make hummus, but you have to like take every single little skin off the chickpea. And so I tried to kind of walk that line a little bit. And I think the pureed recipes were some of the most successful for that.
Fantastic. So I have to ask, so, this is obviously I don't know, a local food book, if you will. Should people grow their own food if they're going to eat it? Do you think they should at least try?
Yeah, I mean, if they're interested, I think certainly. If they're not interested, I don't think that there's any sort of like moral fortitude that comes from growing your own produce. And I think you can do a lot of good by buying it from people who are growing it locally and growing it
Sure.
responsibly. Um, I would say a lot of people say like, oh, I've got like a window box. What should I grow? And I think that growing herbs is like one of the best things you can do for your food because
Hmm.
they're in general so expensive at the store, but they add so much to a dish. And so if you have, a window box that has some parsley and some cilantro and some basil, that's a ton of flavor that you can add to a dish. And it's really cost effective and quick and all those sorts of things. So I would say growing herbs is a big one. And beyond that, I think whatever works for you. Um, yeah.
Okay. So what did it mean for you to be chosen as a Michigan Notable Book author?
Man, I mean, I couldn't believe it when I got your email because I just love libraries so much. And so, well, for two reasons. One, I think that libraries are one of the most important civic services we have in this country. Especially, I've lived rurally most of my life, and rural libraries are critical. When we lived in Northport, uh, we didn't have internet access. It's really hard. Like rural internet is a hard road to hoe, and so we would go to the library after hours to use the Wi-Fi, and they would leave the Wi-Fi on for us so that we could like send invoices and place orders and things like that. And eventually like built a table so that people could sit outside and use the Wi-Fi and things like that. And then just like the nature of getting books, I'm actually in a library right now. I'm at the New Buffalo Library because this is the second time we've done this conversation, and the first time I was at my house and the internet wasn't good enough to have
Yeah.
the video.
Sorry about
And
that.
no, I mean it's my internet. And so, but that's such an example of how libraries are such a public service. And so to have high quality internet to be able to come into a space. I'm sitting in like a really nice conference room where people could, do whatever sort of business or have whatever sort of meeting they need to. And then I was talking with Julie, the librarian here, and they're doing curbside pickup right now during the pandemic, and then also by appointment. And I was thinking, like, who do the appointment is? Like, you have to like find your book. And then she was like, no, it's for copying and laminating and those other services that, we don't have a Kinko's or a copy center here. Like, it's the library. And so to have an award that is so rooted in this institution that I value so much is just such an honor. And it's especially meaningful too, because, I was telling you about kind of the mental toughness that comes from having to sit with your book being out, but you don't know how it's going to go yet. The first indication that I had that people were responding well to the book was my husband's a musician, and he was traveling with his band around the same time that the book came out. So he was I think in Boston, and we don't have many people in Boston. We know a couple people, but it's not, it's not a hometown by any means.
Sure.
And so one of his bandmates' friends was in the van, and something had happened, and my husband Eric was telling this friend about the cookbook. He was like, oh, that sounds cool. I'm going to get it from my library. And so he pulled up the library app to put a hold on it. And he was like, whoa, there's 75 people who have a hold on this book in this town that I don't live in, and anything. And it just is so cool to have a service that can hold a book so you can preview it before you buy it. It's just such a neat thing. And growing up, I remember going to the library in Dorr, Michigan, and it was two like air conditioned portable trailers in a parking lot. And we'd ride our bikes every week and get new books and be able to sit in the air conditioning and read. So there's just so many times where libraries have really touched my life. And so it feels I'm just so grateful.
Well, I mentioned this to you before, the thing that was really not surprising. Your book was very popular with a lot of the libraries, but what was definitely noticeable is how many of the rural libraries in the state wanted you to come and talk to their people. And I was really touched by that. I mean, there were a lot of libraries, rural libraries, small libraries, that wanted you and your book to come. And obviously, COVID preempted that. But I can tell you it was definitely noticed by me, because when we would get the applications in, many small libraries, many small communities wanted you and your book to come and talk to their people.
Well, we'll have to schedule it when we can all be out and about again, because that's, I think it's interesting to talk about rural America right now. I think a lot of rural America is not what it's presented as in a lot of the mainstream conversation. It's a very, in some ways, diverse area, depending on how you look at it. And I think that there is a real sense that we're living separate lives in rural America versus urban America or suburban America. And some of the hurdles that people face, even things as simple as, I remember, I never lived in Northport during the winter, but definitely had, longtime North Porters who would say, oh yeah, well, in the wintertime, you just have to check the weather. And if the wind is blowing a certain direction, you don't drive on a north-south street up the county. You would take, switchbacks down east-west ones as much as possible, because it's going to drift. And that's like, nobody in Chicago was ever dealing with that. You just like, yeah, it was going to be slushy. And so there's just these things that are different, and they're not better or worse. But I think that libraries, and specifically rural libraries, are that access point for a lot of people with, like even for us, I've alluded to the fact that we have not great internet that we pay a fair amount for. But also even things like getting the paper. We used to have a New York Times subscription on Sundays when we lived in Chicago, and the Times doesn't deliver to our house. So we can get it in the mail, which means that we get the Sunday paper on Tuesday. And so we have to drive into town if we want to get the Sunday paper on Sunday. And that's worth it sometimes, and the online stuff can work, but libraries will have those things, and it is that point of connection.
So let me ask, and I asked you this last time. I liked your answer, so I'm going to ask it
Hope it's
again.
the same one.
You better get it right. No.
Yeah, I hope so.
Why do you think people should still read and refer to cookbooks? Last time I talked to you, somebody looked at me when I said, "Yeah, I've got this cookbook." And I'm like, let's go online and look at all recipes, right? And you had a great
Yeah.
answer. It was very nuanced. Why?
Well, I hope it's the same one. We'll see how consistent I am. But
All right.
I think that I use the internet for recipes when I already know what I want to make. And so it's like, oh, I need to remember how to make chicken a la king. Okay, I'm gonna like look that up and then find that recipe. But I think that with a cookbook, it's more utilitarian in some ways. And I think with a cookbook, you get a chance to sort of rattle around in the author's brain and their style of food. And you get to absorb a little bit more of the context around their food. And so, if that means there's a reason why they include some recipes and not other ones, or the stories that are sort of in the recipe headers and things like that. And I think too that there's more voices that we can be learning from.
Mm.
And I think that there is, certainly there are hurdles to access for writers of color to get their cookbooks either published or published with the same quality of inputs that a lot of white writers have. And I think that those stories are really important because, again, the way that food touches everything, it also is such a part of our culture. And so, like, for example, I just got, this is going to be a different part of the answer because I bought this book since talking last, but I just bought a book from an author, Pierre Thame, who is, I think that's how you pronounce it. I've only ever read it. I've never said his name or heard his name pronounced. But he's a chef in New York who's from Senegal. And it's a book about fonio, which is this heirloom grain from Senegal area of
Okay.
Africa. And it's not only just the recipes that I'm getting, like how do I actually cook this grain that I bought that I don't know what to do with because it's not a part of my culture. So
Right.
there's the technical instruction, but then there's also all of these stories about the producers in Senegal who are growing this thing and how it's hard to mechanize the growing of fonio. And so it's telling their stories and then telling his stories as, immigrant food or as a, chef that's in New York. And so you have this window into all of these different lives. And I think that's really hard to achieve on the internet. Certainly it's there. I think blogs do that pretty well. But if I'm just looking up a certain thing that I already know that I'm looking for, I don't tend to kind of dally over those other details or like the ability to be inspired by it. I think that cookbooks still provide inspiration, I think, for people when they don't quite know what they want, but they can be kind of brought into it by the photographs or by the weight of the page, and that feels really nice.
It's even a
Was that what I
better
said
answer
last
than
time?
last. No, that was
All
better than
right.
last time. No, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
The whole cultural aspect of it. I mean, you learn about Senegal in this cookbook that you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about. I mean, that's
Yeah.
amazing. So, well, thank you, Abra, and thank you for driving into your local library to come talk to us.
Oh, yeah. Thank you to Julie and to you for organizing it and for having her let me in I got to come in through the staff door. So I'm even like more closely tied to this
Well,
library now.
and thank you to the New Buffalo Library for hosting
Yes.
Abra today. Yeah, thank you very much, and to Julie, the director. And
Yeah.
everyone, just to let you know, this is Roughage, cookbook by Chronicle Press, 2020 Michigan Notable Book Award-winning book. Beautiful, gorgeous book. I suggest all of you just go out and at least check it out from your local library. If not, purchase it. And we're today here with Abra Berens. And Abra, thank you again for everything that you've done and all the work. And thank you for the cookbook. And do you have any parting words today, Abra?
I just hope that, yeah, I think a lot of people are rediscovering cooking for themselves throughout this pandemic. And I think that can hopefully be a salve for people who have access to food and have the ability to cook, and maybe can be a salve for people who don't have that access, if we're all able to give a little bit back. So I hope that, while we're all kind of figuring out how to navigate this, that people find some comfort in that.
Well, thank you, Abra, and thank you again for contributing to the literature of the state with your cookbook.
Oh,
And
yeah.
just thank you for being here today. And with that, folks, everyone have a great day. And again, Roughage with Abra Berens from Chronicle Press, a Michigan Notable Book 2020 award winner. And again, if you want to contribute or help out the Michigan Notable Books program, please check out the Library of Michigan Foundation, whose contact information can be found at the beginning and ending credits of today's episode. Abra, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thanks for all your hard work on making all of this happen.